first person that's going to speak and do a little introduction is Sue Dixon. She is the chairman of Three-Headed Eagle, and she's the backbone of our organization. She really puts in the work. Some of you work a full-time job each week. She works a full-time job for Three-Headed Eagle, but doesn't come home with a paycheck. So we'd like to thank her for all that she does, and she's going to give a little introduction about our organization.
Hi, welcome everybody, especially you new members and all the old members as well. Well, not old, prior members. We just love seeing this crowd, and we're hoping that it will continue. We have some great speakers coming up every month into next year already, and just keep coming back. We hope to be here every month so you can plan on it. One of the things I wanted to tell you was, I bet a lot of you don't understand what Three-Headed Eagle stands for. And one of the things that we would like to let you know is that the Three-Headed Eagle represents the three branches of government: the judicial, legislative, and and the what? I'm lost. And the executive branch. And the three branches are supposed to create an environment so that they balance each other. Each other is supposed to balance the other when they're out of whack. And we are out of whack in some of our government branches, as we all know. So you're here to help us get back into sync as volunteers, as interested citizens, as candidates, as precinct committeemen. And we hope that you will sign up in the back. We're going to have membership, or not membership, but sign-up lists to do all of those things. We're going to have an election training coming up in December, we hope, with a very professional group, and they're going to train election judges and poll watchers. And beyond that, we have plans to help people become precinct committeemen. And I just want to tell you real quick that precinct committeemen are the most important link in the ladder to government. And you can be one in your own community. And we are going to have Andro speak to us in a minute. And I'll tell you that before we do that, I wanted to thank Rich Hayhurst for helping us with the PA system, which is new and ours. He's been a great help, and we have a couple new people signing on to the team to help him. So I'd like to introduce at this time Andro Lorario. He's the, go ahead. Andro is the Campton Township Republican chairman, and that is one of the townships that Republicans represent in this area. Democrats and Republicans are in every township, every precinct. But he's going to explain a little bit to you about how to become a PC, a precinct committee person, in your neighborhood and what that means. Thank you very much for coming.
Hi, everyone. You guys better not be talking when I'm talking. I got it taped down so I can't move that far. So my name is Andro Lorario. If you just get the Andro part, you guys are doing good. Don't worry about it. Campton Township is that little area just west of Randall Road, covers Campton Hills, part of Maple Park, Elburn. And so I have 10 precinct positions in my township. And I started last year. I got a knock on the door. Somebody asked me if I'd sign a petition or I'd sign some documents. And then I asked, well, is that all I can do? And he says, well, you know, you want to get involved? And I says, well, how do I get involved? He says, well, you could become a committeeman. I said, well, what the heck is a committeeman? And he began to explain it to me. And next thing I know, I became a committeeman. And then I went to a meeting. And then I saw what the meetings are like. And I says, well, I got ideas, and we can do this, 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 and this. And then all of a sudden I became the chairman. So sometimes I should keep my mouth shut. But anyway, before I get into that, I just want to ask some questions. So first question I want to ask everybody, how many of you here have children, grandchildren, going to school, going to high school, going to college, right? All right, well, everyone with your hands up, I'm going to call the FBI because you are now a domestic terrorist. As of yesterday, you are been considered domestic terrorists, right? You know, we hear about the Me Too movement, you know, when it comes to what they need and want, but when it comes to vaccines, I guess that Me Too movement sort of just goes right out the window, right? You know, we get to hear about all sorts of crazy stuff. We get called racist, we get called homophobe, we get called all these crazy things, you know, and nobody ever came up to me and actually asked me who I am or what I'm about. And they'd probably find out that I'm none of those things. So these are the people that we're fighting up against. Now, there's a friend of mine here, and I promised him at a brief discussion that I would not get into the whole left and right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican thing. And I agree with him, and I'll tell you why, because this has now become what's called a community thing. Okay, this is beyond Republican and Democrats, because guess what? There's bad Republicans too. And if you want to know who they are, come and see me later on. I'll give you all their names. Okay? You know, we had a long discussion, and I got where my friend was coming from. And what I said to him was, I said, you know what? I agree, and I'll tell you what. You need a good Democrat to keep the rotten Republicans in check, right? And we need the good Republican to keep the rotten Democrats. So the best thing we can do is get involved. Everybody's always, you know, we come to these little gatherings or we hear the news and then kind of we go on with our life a lot of times, right? Well, I'm going to tell you that we have to get involved. We need help. We need help just getting the right people in, understanding and vetting who the right people are. We can't do it alone. I can't be the one single person that shows up to my Campton Township meeting and decides to put a fundraiser together and then, you know, I'm the only one doing it, or maybe I got one or two people that are helping me. As a matter of fact, at this point, I think I have one that's helping me, and she's not technically a committee person yet. But she's awesome, Jessica. She's here, there she is. So how do you help, right? So the way, what I look for is this. I look for people who want to become committeemen. What the heck is a committeeman? You have townships. You have all these different townships. Campton Township, Batavia Township, Aurora. And within them, there are so many committee positions. In mine, there are 10. In some there are 20, and some there are 30, and some there are 15. And so depending on where you live, you have a precinct. So I'm precinct 7 within Campton Township. So I would represent that precinct from the Republican standpoint. Sorry, Neil, but there's certain times I have to say the words. And my job then would be to go and represent, in a sense, not only the people, the Republicans, the conservatives of that particular precinct within that township, but to get them to help, to get them involved, to knock on their doors, to make the phone calls, which a lot of you guys don't like doing that. I get that. And that's okay. But without us, there is nothing. And so we're sort of the foot soldiers. We're like, they call us the lowest level of the political chain there is, but yet we're one of the most important. You know, Steve Bannon made a comment about it and how just important to be a committeeman is. So the things that we get involved in are those signs that you guys see all over the roads during the election time. That's us putting them up. The literature that's been going door to door that you guys get sick of seeing, that's us. The phone calls, the fundraisers. You know, even the fun ones where we have brats and hot dogs and hamburgers and pig roast, all that, that's us too. So if you guys want to make a change, if you guys want to actually get involved, that is where you start. And then once you get in and you meet with your group, you start throwing ideas. You know, if you guys know your history, there were a bunch of guys at one time that sat in a little pub back in New England that did the same thing, right? And then they created a friggin' revolution. So that's what you guys are, and that's what we are. So if you're looking to get involved, it's about 5-6 hours of your life a month, maybe, okay? During election time, you're gonna do a little bit more. But you get involved and you make a difference. And you make a difference by getting the people in the right positions that will do the right things for us, okay? That way, you can't be sitting on your couch watching Newsmax. We don't watch Fox or CNN anymore, we watch Newsmax. And complaining about, oh my God, how dare they do this, and how can they do this to our kids in schools, and how can they teach them this? And then you go turn around and you go have your dinner, you have your beer, and that's it, you're done for the evening, right? So become a committeeman, and then within that system, we're also getting involved now in training for poll watchers, election judges, which, by the way, the reason why we have some of the issues we have now in Kane County, in Cook County, all these counties, with election integrity, again, doesn't matter what side you're on, it affects everybody, right? And that is because we didn't have enough people to do these jobs. We didn't have people, the good people, watching the bad people. And there are bad people. You're not cutting me off yet, are you? No, wait. Okay, so get involved, come and see me back there. I'll take some names. I need Batavia, I need St. Charles, I need Geneva, I need Campton, I need all these areas, and then we'll tell you how to become a committeeman. And then if you can't become a committeeman, then you know what? Write me a check and give me a donation, and we'll figure out a way to use that. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Andro. Pat Murtaugh is sitting at this table. He's chairman for Geneva, if you'd like to be committee person in Geneva. I wanted to remind you, while it's quiet right now, our next events are November 23rd for Gary Rabine, a candidate for governor. We are educating voters. We're not endorsing any candidate. We had Darren Bailey last month. We're having Gary Rabine this next month. And December 9th, I just confirmed tonight, we're going to have Jed Davis, who was at the Fairview Christian School. He's the president of the school board, and that was one of the schools that is fighting back against not wearing masks. So he will be here on December 9th. I'd also like to introduce a couple candidates that are here tonight. We have Jeff Bowden, is that how you pronounce it? Bodine. He's in the back. He's going to run for Kane County Sheriff at the end of the night. If you'd like to talk to him, he has literature, and get to know him. This is your opportunity. We're educating voters. And the other person sitting at this table is Bobby Peyton. He's running for U.S. Senate. He's right here from Geneva as well. So I just wanted to introduce them. As a reminder, at the end of, after the presentation, we'll have questions. So if you can hold all your questions till the end. And tonight, when you're asking your questions, this is about CRT. So please, we need to stick to the subject because there are so many issues, and we like to focus tonight on CRT. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Derrick and Cedra Crenshaw, and they're going to be talking on critical race theory. Derrick is a teacher at one of our suburban schools for over 30 years. And he's going to give the teacher perspective of what's going on in the schools. And then Cedra, she homeschools and her husband told me, she did all the research. So she has a great PowerPoint presentation. We hope you'll enjoy. And like I said at the end, like we always do, I'll take the mic out and you can ask questions. So thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for coming here tonight.
Thank you very much for inviting my husband and I here tonight, Debbie Konorowski. Thank you. We're very, very excited to be with all of you tonight to talk about this incredibly important topic, critical race theory. If you were to ask 50 different people, what is critical race theory? You might get 50 different responses. So one of my objectives tonight will be to define exactly what it is, as well as to show different ways that it manifests, and how we can stop it. And so before I get into exactly what critical race theory is, we're going to revisit one of its many manifestations that we all had to live through.
Mob of looters tearing apart Chicago's famed Magnificent Mile.
Lord, police got their hands full tonight, don't they?
Breaking into dozens of businesses and taking off with stolen merchandise.
Fire, stop, I get an over here.
Some 400 Chicago police officers are struggling to contain the scene, which erupted around midnight. Smaller businesses and even grocery stores targeted too.
This is where we live. This is our home. This is our front yard. And it's upsetting.
This was straight up felony criminal conduct.
The riots, police say, stemming from a police-involved shooting Sunday. Authorities say a 20-year-old suspect who allegedly fired at police was shot and injured. False information about that shooting, investigators say, spreading on social media, fueling the melee. At one point, the city raising bridges leading into downtown to keep looters out.
Now to NBC5's Patrick Fazio and a Black Lives Matter protest outside a South Loop police station where many of the 100 people arrested are being held. Patrick.
Yeah, Allison, members of Black Lives Matter are holding this solidarity rally that started about 3 hours ago. They're standing with the 100 or so people who were arrested during the looting outside the police station here in the South Loop, where those arrested are being locked up.
I don't care if somebody decides to loot a Gucci or a Macy's or a Nike, because that makes sure that that person eats. That makes sure that that person has clothes.
Black Lives Matter Chicago rallied in support of people who looted and are locked up at the police station at 18th and State.
That is reparations. Anything they want to take it, because these businesses have insurance.
But on Twitter, Reverend Jesse Jackson called the looting humiliating, embarrassing, and morally wrong.
Jesse Jackson has nothing to do with Black Lives Matter. Jesse Jackson was not there for the creation of Black Lives Matter. Jesse Jackson can keep his opinions to himself.
I think we can all agree that the riots and the looting we saw last summer, not just in Chicago, but all across the country, were in fact humiliating, embarrassing, morally wrong, and I would add, evil. What has happened in our country where we have huge amounts of people who think it is perfectly legitimate to break store windows and steal? How are we to maintain a civil society with this type of behavior? Where did this come from?
I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theory.
So any discussion of critical race theory has to begin with where it comes from. What are its origins? What's its foundation? And we have to start with Marxism. Karl Marx developed conflict theory, and he posited that the oppressed would overthrow their oppressors, the workers against the capitalists, and they would take over these means of production and utopia would ensue. Well, we know that's not what happened. Instead, we ended up with 100 million dead people in Marxist-style revolutions. But sadly, that did not stop Marx's true believers, like Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who birthed the idea of the hegemony, which is the idea that the dominant group imposes their ideology on the rest of society. Now, many of you may remember the Smithsonian's Museum of African American History a year or so ago put out this infographic, turned the assumptions, aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States. And this was so racist, it was roundly attacked by the left and the right, and they had to take it down from their website. But this is the hegemony. This is the ideology that is imposed on the rest of society according to those who have adopted CRT. So it hasn't gone anywhere. Likewise, German Marxists from the Frankfurt School, they also kept on Marx's ideas when they expanded his conflict theory. And they developed critical theory, which assumes that structural issues must be the cause of inequities. This should start sounding familiar. Now that word critical in critical theory means to look at a problem or to look at an issue with the intent of finding a problem and deconstructing that problem and then overthrowing that through revolutionary political change. And that's why it wasn't good enough for Black Lives Matter to call for police reform. I think many in the country could have gotten behind police reform. No, Black Lives Matter called for defunding of the police because that is revolutionary and reimagining public safety. So from there, these Marxist sympathizers ended up in our Western halls of academia. And they, inspired by critical theory, came up with the ideas of postmodernism, which rejects the individual and the universal in favor of group identities to invoke those principles of the dominant discourse or the hegemony. Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay do a great job in their book, Cynical Theories, charting the progression of postmodernism in our country. And from postmodernism, it is where we get all of these different studies, if you will, like gender studies and queer studies and post-colonial studies and fact studies and disability studies and critical legal studies, which challenges our traditional legal scholarship. And it is out of critical legal studies that we get critical race theory, which is a way of looking at the law through the lens of race. And so in its essence, critical race theory is Marxism where the economic struggle has been replaced by a racial struggle. So instead of the workers versus the capitalists, now we have people of color versus whites. And it all started with Marxism. And these are just some of the resources that I use there beside it. But let's take a really quick look at the hegemony again, because this is really critical to understanding a lot of the really bizarre manifestations we're seeing happen in our country. But when you look at this a lot more closely, this is an attack on our country. This isn't just about criminal justice or what have you. This is an attack on our country. When you look at some of the ideas here that are to be attacked and deconstructed and overthrown, you see things like the individual being the primary unit, which is incredibly important in our country because we have individual rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not group rights based on some group equity. No, we have individual rights. Every individual matters in our country. Protecting property rights, the extension of your labor, being polite, hard work being the key to success, objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, quantitative analysis. This has all been playing out. We'll take a look at that. Respecting authority, delayed gratification, adherence to rigid time schedules, the nuclear family, father and mother and children being the ideal social unit. And this is why Black Lives Matter, they originally had on their About page, they wanted to disrupt the nuclear family. And this is why, because it's part of the hegemony. And they got so much backlash, they took it off their page. Christianity. Yes, Christianity is part of the hegemony. Any Christians in here? Okay. Yeah, Christianity is under attack. And this is why. This is one of the reasons why. So what is critical race theory? All right, we've looked at the foundations. We know where it's come from. Well, it's a worldview, and it has 4 key presuppositions. Number 1, racism is normal. It's everywhere, it's structural, and it does not require individual conscious racists. Convergence theory. Whites will only undo racism when it benefits them, when it converges with their interests. Anti-liberalism. questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law, a direct attack on our system of government. And lastly, knowledge is socially constructed, where storytelling or narrative is put on par with objective truth. You may have heard terms like elevating the voices of the marginalized, elevating voices of color. This is where this comes from. And we've seen this play out over the past year and a half like this. There's one group of people who will look at an incident, a shooting, a white police officer, a black suspect, let's say, unfortunately, that suspect dies. And one group will look at that shooting and say, you know, that's really unfortunate. I'd really like to know more. Is there body cam footage? Did the suspect have a record? Did the police officer have any type of record? What led this to escalate to a shooting? I'd really like to know more. And then there's another group that'll look at that same incident and say, you know, there it is, right there. There's the structural racism. That white cop had it in for that black guy. He went out hunting for blacks and he killed that guy in cold blood just because he was black. See, there it is right there. I don't need to know anything more. This is where this comes from, and it's extremely dangerous. Now, you may have also heard phrases like conversations. We need more conversations about race. We're not having the right conversations. You're afraid to have conversations about race. Well, this is another manifestation. This is one of the ways that CRT manifests itself. Courageous conversation beyond diversity. Now, this is a training module that I obtained from my school district via the Freedom of Information Act. And some of you may have been through this at work, but this organization, Pacific Education Group, they do this in all kinds of organizations. It's basically a framework to indoctrinate, intimidate, manipulate, harass, humiliate, basically whites at work. Creates a hostile work environment. It's based on the tenets of critical race theory. Says it right there down there in the knowledge principle. And so basically, white people who go through these sessions, they're muzzled. If you agree with everything, because you just want to check that box and get back to work, you're a racist. If you happen to push back in any kind of way, you're really a racist. Either way, you are a racist. And there's actually lawsuits right now, right here in Illinois. I know in Evanston, Skokie 65, a teacher has a lawsuit, and this is one of the points in that lawsuit, this so-called training. So whites are basically unpersoned in these training sessions, and again, some of you may be familiar with this, but this is a manifestation of CRT. And speaking of white people, who's read White Fragility? This is a manifestation of CRT. Robin DiAngelo, she's worked in the field of critical discourse analysis and whiteness studies, and she spends this entire book trying to convince white people that they must identify as their race. And she does that because she has to. She has to invoke that oppressor-oppressed paradigm at all costs. And anyone who's read her book, like I have, she's an incredibly racist. She infantilizes people of color, and she does it because she's promoting critical race theory. And speaking of racists, who's read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi? This is another manifestation of critical race theory. And I bring up these two books because these are in the hands of millions of people, many of whom are our policymakers. This is what they're using to drive policy in our schools, corporations, our military, our government, okay? Ibram Kendi has said that critical race theory is foundational to his work, just this summer. And then he walked that back 2 weeks later because of all the pushback against CRT, which is wonderful. Shows that we're really having a tremendous impact. His entire definition of racism is based on the outcome, or what he calls racial inequity, which there's always going to be inequities of different kinds. But as far as Kendi is concerned, if there's a racial inequity, there must be a racist policy that led to that inequity. And there must be racist ideas that led to those racist policies. So he starts with the end, which is completely opposite of our traditional understanding of racism. He endorses racial discrimination as long as it's in pursuit of racial equity. Yes, he does. And he also proposed a constitutional amendment to create a Department of Anti-Racism that would pre-clear all local, state, and federal policies to ensure that they don't yield racial inequity. It's pure tyranny. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to read his constitutional amendment, but that's where his ideas lead, and we're seeing this play out in our schools and other places. But I want to just share with you, this is the quote, and I thought a lot of people were taking this out of context when I would see it in articles and such, but I read the book, and this is not taken out of context. Kennedy says the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. And the only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. And it means exactly what it says. And that's why we're seeing this play out as anti-white racism in various forms all across the country. So what does this mean? We can say for sure CRT is the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, but don't take it from me. Let's listen to Z Van Fleet, who grew up in Mao's China.
Very long about what's going on in our school. We are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all these things very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. During the Cultural Revolution, I witnessed students and teachers can turn against each other. We changed school names to be politically correct. We were taught to denounce our heritage. The Red Guards destroyed anything that is not communist. Old statues, books, and anything else. We are also encouraged to report on each other, just like the Student Equity Ambassador Program and the bias reporting system. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our school.
How many of our policymakers have heard from Z Van Fleet or people like her? She's not the only one that is warning us about what's happening. And like Mr. Andro said earlier, it's time for us to take action. We don't have a choice. So how do we know if this is, how do you know if this is in your school? Is this in your organization? Well, if you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion department, or an equity director, or your diversity director, or what have you, you have critical race theory. It's a conduit for CRT, and it will result in anti-white racism in one form or another. How else do you know if this is in your organization or your school or what have you? Well, there are dozens and dozens of terms that relate to critical race theory. Buzzwords, if you will. One we all know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Inspired by CRT. Culturally responsive teaching. Unconscious bias. Cultural competence. You can see the full list at Citizens Renewing America. Dominant discourses, hegemony, institutional oppression, white supremacy. All of these buzzwords that we hear, and there's many, many more. They all are inspired by CRT. So if your district says, no, we're not teaching CRT, we're not doing any of that stuff, but you see all these buzzwords through their talking points and their literature, and they're inspired by CRT. Yes, they are. Intersectionality. Who's heard of intersectionality? Okay, that's where your oppression is analyzed based on the number of victim identities you claim. So if you're a woman, you have one layer of victimhood. If you're a black woman, you have two. If you're a lesbian black woman, now you have three. If you're a disabled lesbian black woman, well, now you have four. That's intersectionality in a nutshell. Microaggressions. Who's heard of microaggressions? Okay? Yeah, that's anything that someone that has absorbed the CRT ideology, they don't like. Something you've said, something you've done, something you've posted. They don't like it, so it's an aggression, it's a violence against them. Lunacy. Race essentialism, restorative justice, social justice, structural racism, transformational social emotional learning. You'll hear that term a lot in your schools. That is a conduit for CRT, social emotional learning. Of course, white fragility, whiteness, woke. All right, so what does this look like in our schools? What's been happening? Well, in Cupertino, California, an elementary school forced first graders to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities and rank themselves according to their power and privilege. And you can see I've bolded some of those buzzwords, okay? So they're not going to come out and say, oh yeah, we taught them a lesson that's inspired by CRT. No, we had them deconstruct their identities and rank themselves according to their power and privilege, okay? In Seattle, the school district told white teachers they're guilty of spirit murder. Yes, spirit murder is a CRT buzzword. Against black children and must bankrupt their privilege in acknowledgement of their thieved inheritance. Okay? In Springfield, Missouri, a middle school forced teachers to locate themselves on an oppression matrix based on the idea that straight, white, English-speaking Christian males are members of the oppressor class and must atone for their privilege and covert white supremacy. Now, how is this going to help these children learn to read and do math? It's not. You can find many, many more of these examples at ChristopherRufo.com, who's done amazing investigative reporting on these instances. Okay. More examples, I'll just read one off of here. A Kansas 6th grade math teacher resigned from his district in part because of critical race theory and inspired deep equity teacher training, which is trying to make its way into a district near here, okay? That explicitly instructed educators to reject and resist any parents who disagree with it. And I found that in my district's training docs as well. They're taught to ignore any opposition. Our own Illinois State Board of Education instituted state-sanctioned racism, even though a lot of districts were already doing this, when they instituted their rule, culturally responsive teaching and leading standards. And if you read this rule, it's dripping with CRT terminology. WhatAreTheyLearning.com. You want to know what's happening in some districts here in Illinois? Okay. You can drill down into districts all over the country. Northbrook District 28, 5th grade teacher posted on her Twitter account, our SEL lessons, social emotional learning lessons, are now focused on systems and how they oppress and privilege. And then she talks about a lesson where she taught about systemic injustice, and where groups are pitted against each other, reparations, affirmative action, unfair systems, and listening to the people who have been most harmed, elevating those voices of the marginalized. Adlai E. Stevenson, District 125, put QR codes around the building to allow students to report anonymously if they wish others, including teachers, for what they deem to be racist behavior. And they adopted an anti-racist school model. Now that sounds a lot like what G. Van Fleet was talking about, was happening in her district there in Loudoun County, Virginia, where they had set up these student equity ambassadors in their unconscious bias reporting system so that the students could report on their teachers. And she said this is what also was happening in Mao's China. Evanston, District 202. Schools would give students from marginalized groups first priority for seats for in-person learning, and all other students would be taught remotely. Now, in response to parents who objected, they said, you're part of a continuum of resistance to equity and desire to maintain white supremacy. So all of a sudden, if you're a white parent in Evanston 202, and you wanted your kids to go to school just like they always did, like you pay for, now you're complicit in white supremacy. All right, so now I'd like to bring up my husband to give you a teacher's perspective on how they cook the books. Cooking the books.
Thanks for having us, guys. First of all, After I finish, you'll understand I'm really just a driver. Cedra did a great job putting this presentation together, but what has angered me these past few years is how this is harming the children and harming our country. What they've been doing, they've been cooking the books. They're classifying students by race or by color that have nothing in common culturally. So what I mean by that is, we have students of color come from Chicago public schools or other districts, and then we have kids of color that lived and were born and raised in Wheaton and Glen Ellen. And what they do is, they have them take these standardized tests. And we have a small number of kids in color, say in Wheaton, but if we get 5 or 6 kids from another district, and the next slide will kind of show you exactly what I'm talking about, they destroy the average of the test scores. Okay, so if a kid got like a 15% on the SAT, I'm just making up something, it really brings the test scores down. And what they've been doing is, they've been using the test scores to change curriculum and disciplinary policy. And it's all a sham, because there's really nothing going on but a few kids that are struggling. But they're using these few kids to say this particular race, the Hispanic kids or the black kids, that they're really, that we need equity and we need to change the curriculum to bring these kids up to standards with the other kids. So the statistics are used in the academics and behavior. So a real quick story, what they did to my daughter. My daughter cried in class, and they called that a black dean's infraction, okay? So it had nothing to do with her race, but just because she cried in class and she happened to be black, they use that as a dean's infraction. And they tally up these infractions to make it seem like the white teachers are picking on the minority students. So the next slide, I'll get a little deep into what I mean. So I picked this, so this quote right here is really what it's all about. It's culture, not race, that inhibits intellectual development, Thomas Sowell. So if you read Thomas Sowell, it'll just change your perspective on life. So here's an example. We get a lot of kids from the East, and I just picked this one school district, Proviso West and Hillside. The reading proficiency is 8%, and the math proficiency is at 4%, okay? At Glenbard South, the reading proficiency is at 48%, and the math proficiency is at 50%, but we have a lot of kids that come from CPS or the East, and they bring our test scores down, and when they show this to the public, it scares the public to say, oh man, you guys, your curriculum, something's wrong. We need equity, we need cultural conversations, we need to bring in CRT to bring those numbers up. So it's really a farce of what they're doing. And historically, I picked this school here, Dunbar High School, today. Dunbar High School's reading proficiency in Washington, D.C. is 17%. Their math proficiency is at 2%, okay? But historically, when we talk about culture, Dunbar High School from 1870 to 1955 was an academically elite public high school. It outscored all the schools in Washington, D.C. because the culture, educational culture from the parents and the community was very high. So that shows it cannot be systemic racism that's causing this problem. Okay, it's really the culture and the lack of changing curriculum to help these kids. I love this quote by Toni Morrison: race is the least reliable information you can have about someone. It's real information, but it tells you next to nothing. And that's what the school districts are doing. They're not digging deep into the individual kid that's struggling. They're lumping all the kids together and to create this problem that we need equity. And you know, that's the big thing that's really sparked me at the high school level. I went through that courageous conversation and they accuse a lot of my colleagues of being biased towards the black students, people I worked with for 15, 20 years. And they also accuse me, because I stood up for those people, of being maybe a sellout on Uncle Tom, okay? And I brought my kids up to this district, and if the school district that I'm at, if they were doing anything to harm children, I would have stood up for them. But the new curriculum that they're putting in today, CRT, and they'll call it courageous conversations, they'll call it equity, they'll call it whatever, that's really what's harming the kids, because they're lowering the standards in all of the classes. The behavioral standards are just, they're no more. There's no discipline in the schools anymore, and those are the future, and that's the future of our country. So if we don't stand up to this CRT and this movement, our country's gonna go the way of, you know, we're in big trouble. So we gotta stand up. And the last thing I'll say is, we have to stand up and not allow people to call us out of our name. You guys know who you are. Don't allow anybody to say that you're racist because you don't agree with this stuff, because that's their tactic. They're gonna call you a racist, they're gonna call you names, they call us names, but you gotta stand up, because we know what's right and we know this is wrong, and this is harming the country, and that's the biggest thing. This is harming the country, and it's not helping the people that they say they mean to help. So that's my part. And one of the problems we have, the Department of Education, they kind of push this on people. Human race, there's only one race. And I wrote this 20 years ago when they wanted to know about my son going into kindergarten. They wanted to know about his race. I'm like, what do you need to know about his race? So I wrote this 20 years ago. The United States is truly the greatest mixing bowl the world has ever known. She does better than to categorize her citizens based primarily on their physical traits. Categorizing people based on their physical traits is divisive at best. Citizens should be grouped according to their socioeconomics, which is the real determining factor driving the disparities. So what we're dealing with, the disparities, they're using race to explain the disparities, and that's wrong. They gotta look into the background of these individuals, and from the East, the CPS, they got some great schools, but they got some terrible schools, and 200,000 kids have left CPS and come west. And that's what's causing these disparities. But they don't want to look at the real factors, the family structure. I mean, that's where it's at, the educational values. So again, there's only one race of people, we're all humans. And if we can get to that point, I think we can really change this situation that we're dealing with.
So right now, we will take questions. If you want to raise your hand, I'll be happy to come back with the mic.
I wasn't finished.
I'm sorry. Oh, sorry.
Did you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Just a little bit more. Okay. So why is this important, especially from a teacher's perspective? Because another manifestation of CRT is the 1619 Project. And many of you may have already heard of that. Sadly, this is already in thousands of schools. And this is just another manifestation of critical race theory. Now, the Trump administration, they put out the 1776 report, which was a direct response to the 1619 Project. So this is something that can actually be advocated for. It's an accurate and full and honest telling of American history. So why is this important? This is about our country. And as we've looked at earlier, critical race theory is a worldview. It's not just about history, it's not just about criminal justice, no, it's a worldview. It affects everything. And our identity as Americans is built on a biblical worldview. Whether or not you believe in God, whether or not you're a Christian, we have a biblical worldview. And when you look at our identity based compared to an identity of someone that has absorbed the CRT ideology, they're the opposite. As Americans, we're individual human beings endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? We have individual equality before the law, not group equity. Now, has our country lived up to this 100%? Of course not. But when we look at where we started and where we are now, we've made tremendous progress. CRT rejects the individual. If you don't align with their paradigm, your life story, your lived experience doesn't matter. If you're in that oppressor group, and if you do happen to be in the so-called oppressed class, but you still don't fit their paradigm like me, well, you don't matter. As a group, I'm a citizen of the United States. That's my group identity, if you will. We have ideas, culture, language that we rally around, while we still maintain our ethnic identity. And that's what makes our country so rich and so great. We can be different, yet one. Okay? But under CRT, you're forced to identify with your racial group. And that's why so many of these people, they hate America. They hate our country because they have one identity and they have to look through everything through that lens of race. Universally, as an American, I have a shared humanity with other human beings, no matter where they come from, no matter their faith or no faith, what have you. And that includes our universal human nature, equal rights. People yearn for freedom all over the world. But under CRT, the universal is rejected. Because if I can identify with you as a human being, well, then it's much more difficult to control me. You just can't control me like that. So when you compare our biblical foundation, our Judeo-Christian foundation, to a godless Marxist foundation, point for point, it's the opposite. I'm only guilty for my own sins or my own crimes, okay? CRT says I'm guilty for other people's crimes. I'm given grace freely by God. CRT says, no, you have to do the work of anti-racism and pay your constant penance. Over here, as an American, I'm forgiven. I can be forgiven at some point for my sins, for my crimes, thereby freeing me to freely forgive others who have committed a crime against me or a sin against me. CRT says no, there's no forgiveness. There's no moving on. Here as an American, there's real hope. That's why so many people, they risk everything to come to this country. There's freedom from sin, from guilt. There's an expectation of reward, no matter how poor you are when you get to this country, okay? CRT says, no, there's no hope. You're forever guilty, and there's fear of punishment. How many people are walking around today on eggshells because they're afraid they might offend someone? They might get canceled. Your business might get targeted. You might get fired if you say the wrong thing. And lastly, as an American, our identity promotes healing and reconciliation. CRT is the exact opposite. It promotes resentment, hatred, and more racism. Okay. Again, my husband mentioned we have to be willing to be called a racist. That's just a given. As Christians, I know we should still be sharing the gospel because there's only one real answer to racism or any other sin or crime, and that's forgiveness. And ultimately, that comes from being forgiven by God. Then you can freely forgive others. Okay, and we need to be praying. We must be educating ourselves and others about CRT with calls to action. We have to be taking some type of action. We must be advocating in the public square against all forms of racism, including CRT, and then advocating for policies and curriculum based on truth that unifies us. We obviously need to be voting for people and holding them accountable and asking these type of tough questions of candidates. They need to be rejecting all forms of racism, including critical race theory. And of course, we need to be running for office and winning elections. Legal action may be necessary. The lawsuits have already started all over the country against CRT. And thankfully, we have many states that have already enacted laws or other rules against divisive teaching like CRT. We have to expose it. There's no compromising with this. There are people on the very liberal atheist left and those on the very Christian right that are arguing that CRT or anti-racism, it functions as a religion. And as we've seen, it's because it's an ideology. There's no compromising with this. We have to reject it because it's a Trojan horse for many more critical theories, and I named some of them, like gender studies and queer studies, and all of these studies, all of these issues are based on critical theory. You let one of them in, like many churches have with CRT, you've let all of it in. We have to prepare our children to identify and refute the anti-American, anti-biblical nature of critical race theory. We have to be having these conversations. And if it involves pulling your kids out of school and homeschooling them or doing online schooling, then that's what needs to happen. We have to take action. This is a resource I'll email this to Debbie for people who want it, but this has been very helpful for me. And again, I got this from the Center for Renewing America. It's called Critical Race Theory Claims and Responses. We hear these things all the time. Oh, CRT is only taught in law schools, you crazy conservatives. CRT doesn't teach that white people are inherently racist. It's not actually taught in class. None of these things are true, of course. No one's standing in front of a classroom with a university level text teaching critical race theory. But these ideas have been adopted by many people like teachers and other people in their professions, and they are using them in their work, in the classroom and in other organizations. Again, oh, we're just teaching history. You silly conservatives, you're just... No, it's not just about history. We can teach history, we can teach about slavery and Jim Crow and racism and Japanese internment and sexism and all the rest of it. We can teach it accurately and fully and honestly without going through the lens of CRT. All right, so what is CRT in 60 seconds or less? This is not mine. I got this from Dr. Vodi Bakum, who wrote the book Fault Lines, which I highly recommend. Critical race theory is an ideology that was born out of critical legal studies, that comes from critical theory. It's based on the presupposition that racism is the defining characteristic and the defining reality of American culture, and all things are to be understood through that lens. I will also email this to Debbie. These are just some resources that I used to put together the presentation, as well as I've found them very informative, so I'll make those available. And this was mentioned earlier, we're having a tremendous impact. The FBI is coming after us and calling us domestic terrorists. We're having a great impact. And this is why we're doing this. I focused mainly on the schools, though we know this is happening in our military, this is happening in corporations and government. But unlike the people in our government and the military and what have you, and maybe some of you, children have no defenses against this type of indoctrination. They can't compartmentalize this and then just go back to work. So this is why we're doing this. We will not remain a free country if this takes a hold and we don't put a stop to this. Okay, I had more examples here, but in other industries, but that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. We'll get some questions if you'll, just 1 second. I saw a hand back here right when I thought, oh, someone over there, but I think I saw someone. Is there a question back over here? Okay.
I have a question for you, but before I say that, when George Floyd was killed, this country was united, Democrats and Republicans, on what happened to him by a bad cop, all right? And what did we get for that? From Black Lives Matter in the media? We got a whole summer of mass destruction in cities all across America. My question is about Black Lives Matter. Do Black Lives matter to black people? Now, I don't mean that towards all black people, but Black Lives Matter only comes out when it's a white person versus a black person, and it can benefit their narrative. What about those poor babies on the south side of Chicago who are just sitting there playing on their front porch and they're being shot at and killed? And how come Black Lives Matter doesn't come to the south side of Chicago and voice their criticism to these gang members and that? And that's why I asked the question, do Black Lives matter to black people? And not all black people, but these, I don't even know what to call them. You know, I mean, they're black people and white liberals. I don't know if I should call them liberals, but white people who are, I'll say my niece and my nephew, they were on Facebook, and they were apologizing for their whiteness. You know, I'm going, what's this all about? You know, but anyways, it's those people who have the Black Lives Matter signs. Do they really know what they're putting out there in their front yard? Because these kids, they don't get it. They don't get any pub at all. Maybe a spot on the news for one day, but this is a major problem in all these urban black communities where there are gangs, and that should be the focus about Black Lives Matter.
Well, I can answer that. Well, Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization, okay? So they don't care about the black community. I'm originally from Inglewood, and the men in Inglewood actually kicked Black Lives Matter out of the neighborhood when they tried to come and march through their neighborhood. So, but it's a pride thing, and sadly, many blacks have bought into the liberal lie that all Republicans are racist, and they cannot forgive, or they just don't want to give up on their. Like I said, it's a pride thing that they cannot break away from the Democratic Party. And there's a lot of people actually waking up, but Black Lives Matter, like you said, you know, 30% of abortions are blacks. The shootings every weekend, every day in Chicago, black on black crime, and there's nothing done about Black Lives Matter. So sadly, a lot of blacks just will not break away because of their pride. They haven't became Americans. They've been brought into that lie that, you know, the white majority is against them, and they identify by their race, like my wife said. So when you identify by race instead of your culture, you're going to be used by the Marxists.
Critical race theorists typically call for increased welfare state, coercion, and force to bring about justice, while economists like Thomas Sowell and the late great Walter Williams call for the exact opposite, the abolition of the welfare state, right to discriminate, and ultimate freedom in association. So why was Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell right?
Or why are they right? Well, the proof's in the pudding. Look at the people who have embraced freedom and work ethic and the culture, and American culture. They're all prosperous. You go to the inner cities or where people live in the projects, where the government's taking care of them, there's death and destruction. And even they don't want to be there anymore. Like I said, CPS has lost 200,000 kids. They're coming out here because they want better, but they haven't been able to overcome their racial identity to accept the American culture. They have been told that talking proper is white, behaving a certain way is white. And even this critical race theory talks about all cultures are equal. All cultures aren't equal. If you don't embrace education, if you think that's acting white and you reject it, the consequences of you in this society are going to be poor. And so what they decided to do is they know these people have rejected it, so now they want to bring everyone down. And that's what's going on in our schools today. The curriculum is getting dumbed down. So a couple things in our district. If you do zero work, they're giving the kids 50%. 50% credit for zero work, okay? And the behavior, like the dress code, is gone. You know, so Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, the elites that run this country, the liberal elites, they buried those men. Because they do have the answers. You know, the answers are already there. You don't have to rewrite the book. It's, you know, they've done the research, they've done the studies, and then anyone who embraces American culture is doing just fine. And that's why I said if you broke up the kids that have an educational background culture versus a non-educational background culture, you'll see that there's really no problem by skin color with the kids that embrace education or their families. I got a buddy who lived right across the street from me from Cabrini Greens. Graduated from college, graduated from his wife, because his family had an educational culture. Ben Carson. His mom couldn't read. But the black community has been sold a bill of lie that if you act this way, it's being white. And it's destroyed the black community. And until you overcome your racial identity, you know, you're gonna be in big trouble. And that's what we're fighting about, you know, fighting against. And what they're doing to the kids, like I said, they are destroying the future of the kids that they say they want to help, but truly I don't think they want to help them. I think they're Marxists, and they know this is gonna keep them where they want to be, and it's gonna keep these kids at the bottom, and that's where the power is at, keeping these people down.
Hi, this I guess is more of a statement. I see the seeds of destruction of any country, and the seeds of it start in the young. It starts in the school. Anybody who read history, look back at what happened in Germany with the Nazi Germany. They started young. They started in the educational field with the kids and formulating how they were going to be trained, what books they were going to read, how they were going to be taught. I see some of the same things being done here, and it's not, like you say, it's not for the benefit of the kids, it's for the power of them. And they will certainly, if they keep on this track and do it, will be the destruction of what America is supposed to be about. What it's supposed to be about, to me, is the idea that we all have a chance at prosperity. And it's not a given, but it's a chance for the prosperity. And to do something like this, especially at a young age for kids, to me, is so destructive because these kids come in, especially 4 or 5 years old, they don't know that. They don't know race. They see another person. That's all they see. And to do something like this is just quite destructive, and then our kids don't learn, and 3 + 4 = 5 because you can guess, and you shouldn't grade them because they got the wrong answers. I don't want that guy operating on me or flying a plane then, But that's all I have to say, and I thought your presentation was just phenomenal, just great. Thank you so much.
First off, thank you for all you're doing and spreading truth. It's fantastic. I love it. My husband's a teacher. He just started at a new school this year. It's riddled with critical race theory all over the place, and he had to buy his own American flag and hang it in his classroom himself. He started the Pledge of Allegiance on his own because the school does not do it. The students who are freshmen and sophomore, they have not been in school for 18 months, I think we're going on now. On 9/11, we did an entire day of teaching about what happened on 9/11. They knew nothing. So my question is, what can he do as a conservative teacher who is obviously being pushed out with vaccine mandates and everything else? What can he do in the classroom to make a difference?
Oh, wow. Well, is he tenured yet?
His first year.
First year? So sadly, in those first few years, there's no protection for a teacher. Okay? They can get rid of you and they don't have to tell you why they're getting rid of you. So I tell a lot of the new teachers, keep your head down until you get your tenure. Once you do that, I tell them, well, I left the NEA a few years ago. So we got to hit them where the money's at. So the NEA funds a lot of this craziness. So if you are a tenured teacher and if you can, you need to leave that union. I'm in the American Federation. Yeah. So I got out of the union because I saw the direction and the fact that they weren't fighting for the kids anymore. And obviously I tell people the union is for the teachers and their salaries, but when they want to say they're doing this stuff for the kids and really they're not, then you have to leave and get your money and put it towards some other avenues. So get out of the NEA, get out of the IFT, and new teachers got to keep their head down until they get tenured. And even that might not help because we have, I'm not going to mention any cases, but they're going to go after conservative teachers. So you just got to fight that battle and be ready to sue. Yes.
So my name's Max. I'm a student at a private school. I have a question about how do I fight CRT in the classroom as a student?
Well, like I said before, when they bring up anything that says that oppress or oppress or white versus black, say, look, I am a young man. I've been taught the right way. I don't look at my fellow classmates any differently, boy or girl, and they cannot put thoughts into your mind, and then anytime you hear something that doesn't sound right, you gotta let your parents know and let them come fight that fight for you.
Excuse me, Max, I got a really good answer for that. Don't let anybody view you as a victim. Because for socialism and Marxism to take effect, there has to be a victim and there's empowerment in victims. And these groups know that. And if you let anybody tell you you're a victim or you view yourself as a victim, you're falling into what they want you to do. All right? God bless you, buddy.
First again, thanks for being here. This has been probably the most enlightening session that I've been through. You touched on something toward the end of your presentation. And folks, it comes down to the committee man there. He said it earlier. Get off your butts, folks. All right? Get up off your asses. Take those my wife and I are planning to run for committee man and women in Huntley. All right? I'm considering a run for the United States Congress. I am so sick and tired of this crap. But where do you find the courage? Where did you get it? Where did it come from that you're standing here in a room full of pale faces, and pardon me if I'm wrong, where do you find the courage?
We find the courage in Jesus. That's where we find it.
Amen. Amen. And what she said earlier, if you don't get up off your butts, I want you to think of our constitutional republic, because that's what we have, as a set of scales teetering. All right? And our constitutional republic is teetering right now. And it's teetering because too many of us have sat back and allowed this crap to go on and haven't challenged it. There's a young man in the back of the room who's running for office. He's running for county sheriff. Okay? You want to talk about representative government? There's nothing more representative than your county sheriff. All right? That is the man or woman who will stand in the gap when people come after people like that. Okay? Educate yourself on your county sheriff. Okay? I'm a 5-term retired sheriff. All right? Been there, done that. Okay? Let's get up off our butts and let's do something about this. Let's take our damn country back.
Hi, it's me again. I do have a question for you. A lot of us here know the problems. We're here because we see what the problems are. The question is the answer to it. If it's the black culture that's convincing these people that they're victims, and that if anything they do is white, how do us as white people connect with them? Because we're coming to them, even if we come to them with love and honor, the prejudice that's been preached to them against us disables us right from the start, because anything that we do or say is going to be wrong. And I don't expect you to have an answer with it today, but it's something that needs to be thought out. Because I do have friends of mine that are black, that are in the same income level as me, or the same work ethic or anything. They're not a problem for us because they see what's going on. It's the ones of the lower income that, whether it's the educational, whether it's societal, they're being preached to a different level. And right away when they see me, they see the color of my skin, they're like, oh, I've had the white supremacy going or the white privilege going, even though I work 100 hours a week to get to where I was. And I would like to know how to deal with that.
Without a doubt, it's a tough battle. I mean, trust me, me and my wife, pretty much everyone in our family is kind of on the other side. Oh, come on. Because they have a hard time. Like I said, it's a prideful thing, and and it's part of their religion. This cult of race. This is their religion over the gospel, and we got to try to reach these people with the gospel. But the things that we can do. For one, we got to push school vouchers and show them the statistics of their schools and say, hey, we got to give you a chance with your reading and writing, your proficiency rates, and you're not getting that chance by the people that so-called say they love you. All these people pushing this stuff, they're 6- and 7-figure people. They're race pimps. We got to call them out. So I call these people. At the school board, I said, these people coming in doing this training, they're race pimps. They've made it, and they're making more money off the backs of these people. And if we can get that message out to the lower income people that, hey, you are being used. Look at these people. They got the big houses. They got the big cars. They're living just fine. You're still down here. When are you going to wake up? And maybe me and my wife getting out here and other people. And again, I don't like using the word Caucasian or whatever. You got to stand up and preach what is true. They do know what is true and what is right. And some you're going to reach, some you're not. Because sadly, I'm at the high school level. Some of these kids, I preach the message, and most of them reject it. And that's a hard, you gotta accept that most people are going to reject it because they're not biblically sound. And that's really what it comes down to. Like you said, why are we here doing this? Because we know where this leads in the end. And then like Lee Van Fleet, the lady from China, if you study what happened in Mao's China, that first group of communists that pushed through, they got their heads chopped off in the second wave. And a lot of these people don't realize, they're pushing this stuff and they think they're going to make it. But once they make it to the top, they're going to be the next people chopped off at the neck. So we got to teach history. We got to push vouchers. What we've been doing is, my friends from St. Charles, right there, they put these door hangers. They got 5,000 printed out in St. Charles. We got 5,000 printed in our district. You got to go to these school boards. You got to go to your county meetings. I just became a committee man in Milton Township. And we got to reach our neighbors, and we got to let them know what is going on. A lot of people are just watching TV, living their lives. They have no idea what's going on. Like I said, when I told the people about kids getting 50% credit for doing nothing, left and right, no one agreed with that, but they don't know about it. And then we also have no academic consequences for cheating. No academic consequences for cheating now. That is what has happened with CRT, the standards. That's what's happened. But if we can awaken enough people, because everyone on the right or the left's not a Marxist. And we got to start reaching out to some of those people and get them to come our way. We don't have to agree with everything, but on America, I think we can bring some of these people around.
I just wanted to say quickly, thank you guys so much for putting together this presentation. I thought it was done so well. And in speaking of how to help educate people in our community about what you guys are talking about, how do I get, and I know this is probably cheating, but how do I get that presentation emailed to me so that I can, pass it along to friends and family and people who need to learn about this?
Yes, Cedra says she'll send it to Debbie, and then, Cedra did a great job doing all of this research.
We'll figure out a way to share. Whatever you can share, we'll figure out. Everyone that's a member, we send out a newsletter, and we can include that in the newsletter. So.
My name's Art Lemke. I'm with some of my fellow 303, that's the St. Charles School District. And I decided on the way here, turn the corner, what do I do to get out of the basement and lead? Everybody there's at least one guy that ought to get out of the basement and lead. But for our purposes, what do we do to help homeschooling? That is, I alone can't homeschool somebody. My son's long moved away and grown up. But to support, and it's kind of a rhetorical question to this group, what do we do to support homeschooling, if not full-time, to give the kids a little time to get away from the, remote learning and the tripe that they're getting. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a young lady out in West Chicago, and I think organizations like this can maybe start, collecting funds for scholarships for people that may want to get out of the schools. Like me and my wife, we can afford to do it, but there's a lot of people out there, like in the West Chicago area, CPS, looking for scholarships to get their kids into a homeschool co-op. So if we can start pooling our money together with different organizations and maybe advertising scholarships for kids, that's a good way to help help kids that want to get out of these failing public schools.
On the same subject, I spoke a couple months ago about D303 and CRT is here. Unfortunately, homeschooling is not the answer for some families. So getting to your school board meetings, speaking out, even just attending would be vital. Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to say, first and foremost, thank you. It does take courage to stand up there. I am the CEO and founder of Diversify Solutions, which is a company that I started in the tech space as a minority that grew up in the inner city, who then also lived in Wheaton, actually went to Glenbard West, and was one of those kids filtered in through the system. I decided to create a space, and I've been working in the DE&I space for a very long time. So I just wanted to touch on a couple. People asked some very great questions. I know the gentleman that asked earlier the question, does BLM care? No. I actually spoke at the BLM rally. I was approached because people thought the idea of my company was very progressive, and living in Geneva, I'm obviously not the white girl, that wasn't my talk track. I'm not the black person, that's not my talk track. But my talk track was that racism at its core is a hard issue. That's why bringing it vertically, that is going to be the only solution. But through that, my company does a lot of leadership training, ERG training, things around diversity, equity, inclusion. We were offered the opportunity with Aurora Interfaith. They wanted to do some training. Long story short, I reached out to the BLM and said, hey, this is a great opportunity. I would love to bring you in to educate, because I'm not from BLM. I don't know your talking points, but they want to be educated. And they said no. They said no because it was, it had Christian ties, blah, blah, blah. At that point, I understood very quickly that it had nothing to do with actually educating and progressing the Black community. With that, to piggyback off of that, when you talk about, this is not only a hard issue, it's a mindset issue. So we need to keep that at the forefront as well, as we're talking about having to dismantle mindsets of underserved communities that have been told and trained specifically, this is how we work, this is how we operate. And I can speak to that because that's the space that I come from. But I just wanted to encourage you as we leave here today. You asked the question, how do I work with my other peers, my African American peers? How do I speak heart language to them? The reality is there's a lot of places and organizations you can get connected to, Aurora, Elgin. I do a lot of community work, I can connect any of you guys to that. But to take this further, language matters in a sense, the way that we communicate with each other matters. Opening that up and understanding that we're all just human. For the little boy that asked how to push back to CRT, refuse to identify as anything else other than the Son of God, and refuse to acknowledge anybody else other than you were created as a human being, and I love and honor you and walk in that truth. But if any of you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to help you along. Like I said, this is what my company does, but it's so encouraging to see as minorities, we do need to get up and educate. I've taken a step back from Diversify because of the misuse of the DE&I space. And for me, it breaks my heart for those of us that have truly been advocating before this became a buzzword and the new thing. But there's a lot of work to do, but you guys showed up, and that means that you're here for the heart issue, and your hearts are good, and your hearts are pure, and let's infuse that into our communities and into our children, and that is the hope, and that is what we can do. Thank you.
We have time for one more question that was asked up here. 1 second. Janine, I'll get you too, and then that's it.
Okay. Hi, couple things. Number one, being first generation American, growing up in a poor family in the inner city of Chicago. You guys are spot on. It's God first, and growing up poor, doesn't matter what color skin you are. All my friends growing up were poor, and they were all different color skins, and there was barely any white kids in the class. So this is not a skin color issue, it's an economic issue. So thank you for pointing that out and pointing out the fact that God first matters. The federal government's spending $100 a month per 50 million students in this country, ripping us off. And that money is what's spread this disease across the country. And I guess the big question I have for you is, sexual abuse is a crime. I think we would all agree with that. Everywhere in the world, sexual abuse is a crime. If somebody abuses a child, right? So mental abuse should be a crime too. So these people need to be arrested. These teachers, these administrators, they need to be arrested. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to start making citizen arrests if our courts have been compromised. The Chinese have infiltrated our system. This is about causing racial division between whites and blacks and other groups. And the more they can cause hatred and cause us to try to want to kill each other, it's easier for them to swoop in. So my question is, with regards to, I know you mentioned homeschooling and vouchers, the money should follow the student. What do you think we can be doing to get these people arrested as soon as possible, and every single school board member recalled as soon as possible before the election? That's my question.
That's where taking action comes in, Mr. Andro. We need people. We need people at these school board meetings. You know, we need people making these phone calls and people going out and becoming precinct committeemen. It's not going to happen any other way. We have to literally overwhelm the system and all of the fraud that we know is taking place in our election system. We need people. That's it. We gotta get the people out of these positions that are doing. That's the only way I see it. We need our people on our side to take action, whatever that may be. I know, everything isn't for everyone, but we have to take action.
Okay, I agree with what Bobby said.
Take them out.
But the question I have is, when Darren Bailey was here, he mentioned that there was 30% of the children in Illinois public schools are not there this year. They've been pulled out because of all the different things. So at what point economically, or do they say, okay, it's have to be 50% are gone for them to say this is not working? At what point, we're paying all these property taxes. 30% are already gone out of the school district now. At what point does it economically break them, or them to say this isn't working anymore, the CRT and all that, people are leaving because of that?
Well, real quick, you'd have to do your research, but I think they're being allowed, I think the school districts have been allowed to use old data, old numbers. So they're still getting the money for those kids that aren't there, I think. So I'm not 100% sure there, but I've heard that they've been using the old data because of COVID. So the money hasn't hit them yet. But if they keep pushing, the people with means will leave the public schools, and they will change, because it is all about the money. And then I just want to say one thing before I leave on my last statement. We got to change our terminology. We got to stop calling some people minorities, okay? We might have different cultures, but we're all Americans. And this is what the Department of Education, this is what they've done to us. Once Jimmy Carter started the Department of Education, and the money, that's how they push all of this curriculum into the schools, because the administrators know if they don't do this or that, they don't get the money, okay? And that's why I say they're cooking the books to get the money. And they're using, sadly, they're using poor blacks and poor Hispanic students to drive all this stuff. And like I said, the Russians long ago said, we're going to destroy this. We can never defeat this country from without. We're going to defeat you from within, causing divisiveness, using race to divide the country. And that's exactly what they've done. They've done a great job of it.
So we should treat them like enemies and take them out properly.
Last question, Bob.
So they
I attended Geneva School Board meetings for 10 years. Always questioning the school board. They never gave you an answer. They stare at you and don't say anything. And now it's gotten worse over the last couple of years because the teachers union, the IEA, have been financially supporting candidates that will be
you got to wake up your community and let them know
supporting the teachers or the union's program.
that you got to vote for.
How do we fight that?
Your tax dollars.
And then secondly,
gotta get
both
more
of
than
you
15%
clearly are highly educated.
Those are the most
Can you
important
share with us a
elections
little bit about each one of your
that are out there
backgrounds?
for us, really. That those local school board elections
Well,
are controlled.
what we're
millions
doing,
of
you have to
dollars
mobilize
and
your
our
community.
children's minds.
And you got to vote those
So we gotta
board
wake up
members
enough
out.
people.
That's pretty much the
So
only thing
we're
you can do.
mobilizing
We got
a group in our
2-year
district.
cycle,
Everyone's got
and we have to mobilize enough people to wake up
and you
and
have
go
to
vote.
change
15%, 10% of the
we got
people
2
go
years
vote
for
for
those
those
school board
boards.
elections. So you got to wake your community up so they go vote.
Just
gotta,
and yes,
you gotta
even
beat
as
the
a
streets.
as a
Gotta
teacher
get out there, get
and
those
a member of a
people out
union,
there, educate your
I always
folks,
thought it was dishonest.
interview those
for the
candidates
unions
and
to
find
back
out what they think
people
about
that
America.
negotiate their
They
contracts.
believe in
So it's
CRT.
a totally
They don't
dishonest
believe in America.
system
It's a Marxist
where the teachers
organization,
union
and it's a
is
Marxist philosophy.
electing basically
real
their
quick on
bosses. So you got to
my
wake up your
background,
community and let them know.
I was in
Look,
CPS
this is
schools
probably the number
to
one
third,
thing
fourth grade.
that you got to vote for.
Got to Bolingbrook,
your taxes,
by
your tax dollars.
fourth grade.
So we got to get more than
teachers
50% of the people to go vote.
And the
So
system
those are
at
the
that
most
time
important elections
didn't care about your race. They just
that are
wanted
out
to
there
help you
for us,
as a
really.
student. That those
And I
local
met a
school
lot of
board
people, a
elections
lot of good people
are control of millions
from
of
being in
dollars
Bolingbrook
and control of our children's
and
minds.
I was tremendously
So we got to wake up enough
behind
people coming out
So,
of CPS.
We're mobilizing
Those
a group in our
people love me of
district.
all races.
Everyone's got to
Got me to
mobilize
where I wanted to
groups
be,
in their
help
school
me get a
districts,
scholarship to
and you
U of I,
have to
and then,
change
end up graduating
those
as
school
a-
boards.
You know, I was
So
a
we got
wrestler
2 years
went to
before
U of I,
those school boards
came out.
You
So
can
I've
change
been
those
all
school
over
boards.
this state.
You just got to
dealing
get
with
it. You got to
people.
beat the streets. And I see
You gotta get
people
out there,
as
get those
people
community
and
people
not
out there,
by
educate
their
your
color
folks
or their race.
and
And
get more
interview those
people
candidates
to
to
that
find out
point.
what they think
We
about
can solve
America.
a lot of these
They
problems.
believe in CRT. They don't believe in America because it's a Marxist organization and it's a
I grew up in a
Marxist
ghetto
philosophy.
in
And
Harrisburg,
then real quick on my
I went to predominantly
my
black,
background,
schools all the way up.
I was
till
in
I
CPS
graduated.
schools to third or
Went
fourth
to a
grade.
historically black university.
Got to
a
Bolingbrook
degree in accounting.
by fourth
I was
grade. And the
indoctrinated
teachers
with
and
all of
and
this
the system at that
liberalism, all
time
of this nonsense
didn't
going on.
care about your
But
race.
thank
They just wanted to
God,
help you as a student. And I met a
God
lot of
rescued
people, a lot of good people
because
from
like
being in
somebody said,
Bolingbrook.
this is a heart issue.
And
This is
I
a
was
spiritual
tremendously
issue.
behind
And most
coming
of
out
my
of CPS.
education happened
But those people
after
loved
I
me
graduated.
of all races. They
Reading
got me to
books,
where I wanted to be,
reading the Bible,
helped me get a
really
scholarship to U of
reading
I,
So,
and then, I ended up graduating.
that's my
as a-
background in a
you
nutshell.
know,
I've
I was a
been
wrestler,
at
went to
home
U
with
of
my
I,
kids for
came out. So I've been
15
all over
years,
this state
homeschooling
dealing with
past,
people.
4
And I see
years.
people as people and not by
It's
their
just-
color
it's a
or their
spiritual
race.
journey.
And if we get more
That's
people
my
to get to
story.
that point,
I have
we can
nothing
solve a
but
lot of
love
these
and
problems.
compassion for people who in the ghetto. They are indoctrinated. I grew up in a ghetto in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I went to
I was there.
predominantly black many of my family members, they're still there. Graduated. So
went to
the one gentleman who asked you how to reach those people, degree in accounting. Just got to be honest. I was indoctrinated. Share the gospel with them if all you're, of this, if you're a Christian. Liberalism, all of this nonsense growing up, and but just love them. They're your neighbor. Love them, and it's up to God to change their heart. We can't because, do that. Like somebody said, this is a heart issue. This is a spiritual issue, and most of my education.
I cannot thank you enough for the time for tonight and what you provided us. It's really
That's my background in a
amazing.
nutshell.
I mean,
I've been
I hadn't heard
at home
them.
with
I
my
had a couple
kids for
recommendations, and you
15
far
years, been
would
homeschooling the
pass
past
what I would have.
4
I mean, it
years.
was amazing. So we really appreciate
It's just
the
it's
time.
a spiritual
and these
journey.
are volunteers.
That's my
These are
story. So
people
I have
volunteering their
nothing but
time.
love and compassion for
So thank you
people
very much.
in
Greatly
the ghetto.
appreciate it.
They are
One thing I
indoctrinated.
noticed on her screen,
They're lost.
she had the
Because I was there.
imprimis issue, we have that
Many of my
in the
family
back.
members,
We
they're
got
still
that
there.
from Hillsdale College. If
So
you'd like to
the
see
one
that on
gentleman who asked you how to reach those
CRT. And
people,
lastly,
just gotta
get
be honest.
involved. Andra will be back at
Share
the
the gospel
table.
with them if you're a Christian. Just be honest and just love them. They're your neighbor. Love them.
Hey,
it is up to
excuse me,
God
guys,
to
real
change
quick.
their heart. We
Christopher
can't do that.
Ruflo is
We
going
just
to be
have
in
to love them
Wheaton,
and just be honest with
or
them.
actually Glen Ellen at the Avenue later this month. So if you get a
I
chance
cannot thank you
to,
enough
get
for
to
the
that
time
event.
for tonight.
He's a great
and
speaker,
what you
and Cedra
provided
got a lot
us
of her
is
research
really
about CRT
amazing.
from
I mean,
Christopher Ruffalo.
I hadn't heard them. I had a couple recommendations, and you far. So lastly, please go in the back and sign up.
So we really
for
appreciate the
election
time.
judge training volunteers. These are people volunteering their time. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it. One thing I noticed on her screen, she had the imprimis issue. We have that in the back. We got that from Hillsdale College, if you'd like to see that on CRT. And lastly, get involved. Andra will be back at the table.
Hey, excuse me guys, real quick. Christopher Ruffalo is going to be in Wheaton, or actually Glen Ellen at the Abington later this month. So if you get a chance to get to that event, he's a great speaker, and Cedra got a lot of her research about CRT from Christopher Ruffalo. Thanks.